If you don't want to be included, thank you, Nikki. If you don't want to be included with that, you can choose to leave should you wish to. Okay, great, thank you. So, welcome everybody. Pleased to see so many people on such a sunny day joining us for this. As I said, my name is Sarah. I work for the Dorset Coast Forum, and my colleague Nikki and I are hosting this event. The contents, the aims for the event tonight, will be introducing you to the project team. We'll be having a look at the aims of the event. We will have a reintroduction of the FSERM strategy, a little bit of feedback on the last engagement round, having a look at some baseline assessments and key findings, and also inform you on how you can inform the FSERM strategy at this stage of the project and in the future. Okay, and we have some introductions. So on the call this evening for you, from the project team, we have Alan Frampton, Peter Ferguson and Ben Taylor, maybe names you've already come across before. I know there's been a number of public events, and also the survey for all of this is live at the moment and is live until the 26th of June. Welcome to all of you, and if we pop on to the next slide, Alan, please. Okay, so the aims of this evening, everybody, we want to raise awareness of the work that's being done to develop the Christchurch Bay and Harbour FSERM strategy, how and when engagements and communications will be continuing throughout this process. The project team will be feeding back, we'll illustrate how they have addressed comments from the last engagement round, which is in July 2021. They'll be sharing findings of the work that's already been done to understand the current baseline, how this has informed the hypothetical do nothing situation, whereby all existing defences are abandoned and the required adaptation for sea level rise and other climate change responses isn't addressed. And also we will be looking to seek comments from all stakeholders on the baseline assessment findings, and we want you to tell us if we have missed anything. So there will be opportunity throughout for some Q&As. I will be helping to ensure that if there are questions, they're raised and answered. However, there is a lot of people in the call. Please use the chat function. As I said, if you go to the taskbar, you'll see the chat. Click on there, put your messages in, make sure that your full name is there as well. It means we can feedback directly to you. Okay, and we are going to start with a poll at this stage. So on your screens, you should now see a poll. Question is, how did you hear about this event today? It is a multiple choice. Please do pop in there how you found out. I will give you a little bit of time to do so, and then we will see the results of that. It's always really useful to know for any community engagement how best we can connect with people. So we thank you very much for completing that. I can see it's still moving around, so I'll give it a little bit of time. Whilst that's happening, just a reminder, there is a link to the survey. Nikki's just put into the chat function, and again, it is open until the 26th of June. So if you haven't already done the survey, please do. Okay, I think we've probably entered the poll. So quite a high percentage for an email invitation, which is great. And then quite a mixed bag between newsletters, websites, promotional posters and flyers. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, thank you, Nikki, for that. So that's great. We have a second bit quicker poll for you. Question is, which area are you most interested in? Is it Christchurch Harbour, Mudford, Sandbank, Christchurch Beaches and Cliffs, Nash Cliff and Barton on Sea, Hordle Cliff and Milford on Sea, or all of the above equally? This will get a sense of who's in the room this evening. Okay, so quite a high percentage Milford-on-Sea. But to be fair, all of the above, but that's really useful to know. Thank you very much. We have good representation from all of the areas, so I'm pleased about that. Thank you for that. Okay, and we shall move on. Thank you, Alan. Right, so I'd like to welcome Alan now to talk through the reintroduction to the FSIM strategy. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming. So for those who attended an engagement event this time, well, probably about 11 months ago now, you might be familiar with some of the information I'm going to set out. For those coming for the first time, it's just going to give a brief overview of the strategy area and how we're going about setting developing this new strategy for Christchurch Bay and Harbour. So we are focused on defining the approach to long-term management of flooding coastal erosion risk between Hengistbury Head at the western end of Christchurch Bay over to the start of Hurst Spit over towards Milford-on-Sea, and encompassing Christchurch Harbour up to Tuckton Bridge and Knapp Mill on the rivers Stour and Avon respectively. In regard to Hurst Spit, there is a similar project to this one going on covering Hurst Spit to Lymington. That one's being led by the Environment Agency with partners New Forest and others. That project recently took a slight change in tack, and we're already considering implications for Hurst Spit from wider Christchurch Bay, but we've actually joined up the two projects around Hurst Spit, and we are jointly going to develop the evidence and the approach for Hurst Spit between the two projects. So both projects will end up having the same approach for Hurst Spit defined in them. So that's a slight change to how we talked about that last time. But in terms of what a strategy is, so the strategy is working out how best to take forward the policies that were adopted in 2011 in the Shoreline Management Plan. That's our starting point. We'll be looking at all the more new evidence and guidance that's come about since the SMP as well. And not only taking the SMP as the starting point, but if that evidence suggests the SMP needs to be revisited or thought about again, that's an option we can flag to the SMP management group. There's a separate process for that, but our starting point for this is the SMP policy intent. In terms of what we'll end up getting with this, we'll have an approved strategy, which will make it easier for us to then go ahead with schemes along the frontage and progress business cases and get works done on the ground. So it takes a little while to get a strategy in place, but once it does, it lets us move forward more quickly with schemes. And those schemes have to be justifiable technically, environmentally, and economically. And we as local authorities only have permissive powers to undertake coast protection work. So we have to make sure there's a good reason and case to do so. We don't have a statutory duty to defend everywhere. This is fitting in with a suite of other strategies and plans across the area. So we have two shoreline management plans that overlap at Hurst Spit at the eastern end of our area. There are equivalent strategies covering west of Hengistbury Head, covering Poole Bay and Harbour. The Hurst Spit to Lymington is going to be a similar strategy going up to Solent from Hurst Spit. And coming down the rivers Avon and Stour, the Environment Agency are looking at the fluvial flood risk from the rivers coming down those as they enter into Christchurch Harbour. So this strategy is pretty much the joining piece between those other ones. So we'll have a suite of strategic strategies covering our area, and they lead on to schemes. So the big renourishment scheme that some of you may be aware of in Poole Bay, Bournemouth and Poole Beaches that's ongoing, that is underpinned by a strategy that was approved in 2014. Similarly, that we've got projects at Hurst Spit. The Hurst Spit Beach Management Plan was written a little while ago as part of the scheme that recharged the Spit in the 90s, and that's maintained and kept live as an ongoing plan. And then all of our work is informed by ongoing gathering of monitoring data as part of the South East Regional Monitoring Programme. And at Barton-on-Sea, New Forest have been doing some work on investigating and understanding the cliff movement and mechanisms there. We're taking a staged approach to developing the strategy. So we're in stage 3 now, coming towards the end, where we've been gathering and developing our baseline evidence of how the coast is evolving and all the key features that we have to be mindful of as we start to think about what we might do to manage the risks of future flooding and erosion. As part of this, we've developed something called the do nothing scenario. That is a hypothetical scenario where we assume we're not maintaining anywhere along the coast, and we assess what we think might happen by way of coastal evolution as a result. That underpins our case for then where we may want to do something. It's our comparison to for the appraisal process. You can see there we've marked on 6 engagement rounds as well throughout the process. So this is the 2nd engagement round. We will be doing another similar round to this in round 4 with raising awareness and let you know where we've got to in stage 5. Stage 7 will be around this time next year on our current program, and that will be the formal consultation where we'll come out with leading preferred options of what we think the appraisal suggests is the best approach in each part of the coast and in combination. So the first round of engagement we did last July, August time, just to feed back on what we learned from that exercise. It was designed to raise awareness of the project and seek information to help us develop the evidence base. We had 3,000 people visit our website at that point and 147 respondents to the online survey we ran as part of that first engagement round. That gave us a range of evidence, comments, concerns for us to bear in mind and build into our evidence base. Some of the comments were more around ideas for future management, and we've retained those to put into the options appraisal process when we get to that stage in the coming months. Some key stats at the bottom of the page there. Key one for us was 93% of those responding agreed that it was a good idea to develop and adopt a strategy, and 89% of people agreed that where practical, options that we identify should be cost effective and have low environmental impact. We have produced a report of that first round engagement, so there's a lot more comments and responses, how we've dealt with those comments on our website there at Have Your Say, and you can access that after this meeting.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alan, very much. And we are now going to move on to Ben Taylor. Ben, you're going to talk through the baseline assessment key findings. So Ben is the consultant project manager. Thanks, Ben. Take it away.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. It's great to have you here. Great to have you here this evening. So the technical work undertaken to date within the strategy has been focused on establishing the baseline. And as Alan has just discussed, this has been a key first step in the overall strategy development, because it provides us with a detailed understanding of the current situation, which will then enable us to go away and develop and appraise options to manage the flood and erosion risk moving forward. We've undertaken a number of baseline studies, including an environmental baseline study, defence condition assessment, coastal processes study, and a baseline economic damages assessment. And I'll give a quick summary of each of these in the next slide. So starting with the environment, the environmental receptors at the site are extremely important for the development of the strategy, and we will need to consider the environmental impact of any options that we develop for improving the flood and erosion risks in the area. The environmental work that we've undertaken highlights just how diverse the environment is within the study area, illustrated by the large number of environmentally designated sites. For example, there are sites of special scientific interest, known as SSSIs. There are different special areas of conservation, special protection areas, Ramsar sites, and nature reserves. And these sites have all been primarily designated due to their important habitats, their species, geology, and geomorphology. The special areas of conservation, special protection areas, and Ramsar sites are particularly noteworthy given their status as international designations. Next slide, please. In addition to to that, there's also numerous listed buildings and scheduled monuments within the strategy area that have heritage and historical importance. For example, there are multiple Grade 1 listed buildings, including Highcliffe Castle and Christchurch Priory. Some of the heritage and historic assets are expected to be at risk for coastal flooding and erosion in the future. So it was important for us to identify these and then build this into our decision-making process moving forward. Next slide, please. So given the importance of the local environment and the findings of the baseline assessments, moving forward into the option development and appraisal stage, we would ensure that the environment is embedded into the decision-making process. And to help with this, we have identified the following environmental objectives for the strategy, which will be considered when we are developing and appraising options. Some of the options that we will consider moving forward will achieve the objectives more so than others, and that will be a key factor in deciding the leading options and recommendations for the strategy. I won't go through each of the different objectives in detail, but as you can see, there are objectives relating to biodiversity and geodiversity, climate change, landscape, the historic environment, land, soil and water resources, population and communities, and transport. Next slide, please. So moving on from the environment, we've also undertaken a defence condition assessment that outlines key information on the condition of the coastal defences along the strategy frontage. This was a key piece of work as it's provided us with the information to inform baseline assumptions when undertaking the economic damages assessment, and it will also inform the option development and appraisal moving forward. For example, in areas where we found defences to be in a poor condition or have a low residual life, we know that interventions will need to occur sooner rather than later in these locations. In the assessment, we collated information on defence length, condition and residual life, the defence type, and the ownership and maintenance responsibilities of those defences. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next few slides just show maps of the estimated residual life of the coastal defences along the frontage. I think these maps are really useful in highlighting the key areas where the defence condition is poor or where the residual life is lower. The areas in red on the maps are where we estimate the residual life to be less than 10 years. I should stress that this is assuming that no maintenance is undertaken in the future, as that was our baseline assumption. There may be an opportunity in some locations to increase the life of the existing defences with targeted maintenance work, and this will be a key consideration when we are developing options for managing the risks in the future. As can be seen on that last image, sorry, Alan, the areas with the lowest residual life along the BCP part of the frontage, the defences at Hengistbury Head, including the Gabions, Rock Armour and concrete revetment, the defences at Mudderford, where some of the groins are in a poor condition, and also at Friars Beach, Seawall and Promenade. Next slide, please. Within Christchurch Harbour itself, the majority of the defences have an estimated residual life of more than 10 years, but there are some isolated locations where the residual life is less than 10 years, for example, around Christchurch Priory and the harbour walls in the Quants area. Next slide, please. For the New Forest District Council part of the frontage towards the east, parts of the defences around Milford-on-Sea are in a poor condition and have a low residual life. For example, the concrete sea walls adjacent to Cliff Road and Hurst Road. In these locations, the integrity of the defences are particularly sensitive to the presence and supply of beach material in front of the defences. The beach material is very dynamic and subject to coastal processes, which leads on to this slide here. So many of the coastal defences along the strategy frontage do rely on that beach material as it provides first level of defence against flooding and erosion. The beach is apt to reduce the wave energy as waves run up the beach, reducing the forces and size of waves interacting with the defences. One of the issues with this, however, is that due to ongoing coastal processes and differences in weather conditions throughout the year, the height and width of the beaches in Christchurch Bay regularly change with the seasons. For example, during winter, the typically stronger waves act to move material off the upper beaches and deposit it lower down. And the resulting beach profile provides less protection to the coastal defences. But on the other hand, in the summer, generally weaker waves act to build up the beach again, and the upper beach typically increases in volume. In addition to these seasonal variations in beach profile, you also get longer term patterns caused by the processes such as longshore sediment transport or longshore drift. These are natural processes. That means that in some areas of the frontage, the beach levels naturally get eroded, whilst in other areas, the beach levels naturally accrete or get larger. The beach levels are regularly monitored, and in the baseline work that we've undertaken, we've built up a good picture of where the long-term erosion and accretion is happening. So these figures here show the long-term patterns of beach erosion and accretion. Areas shaded in blue indicate a long-term accretion pattern, so the beach is getting larger, whilst the areas in red indicate erosion. These two images here show the western part of the bay, and as can be seen, the beach levels here have remained reasonably stable or have seen a slight increase in volume since monitoring began in 2003. The pattern has been helped by active management of the beach volumes, as in these locations, the beaches are regularly topped up as and when required by recycling sediment from areas where it's deposited elsewhere. Next slide, please. In contrast to the images on the previous slide, between Beckton and Milford on sea at the eastern end of the frontage, the beach levels have been declining over time, as shown by the extensive red areas in the image. This is despite regular efforts to recharge and top up the material in this location. And we actually think that beach lowering was one of the contributing reasons for the recent failure of the defences in this location. Next slide, please. Okay, so in developing the baseline assessments, what we really wanted to know was what would happen if we were to cease maintenance of the defences completely and let natural processes continue without any further interventions. We needed to answer this question because this scenario is what we refer to as the do nothing scenario, and it forms the baseline from which we can then compare the relative merits of do something options to manage the risks. I should stress that the do nothing it's purely hypothetical. We're not proposing this as an option moving forward, but we do need to establish what it may look like to enable us to undertake the option development appraisal against this baseline. So in reference to the coastal defences, with the do nothing baseline, we would expect to see the defences becoming less and less effective over time and eventually failing. The timescales of when defences may fail will vary, given the existing defences are currently in different states of repair. And in addition to that, the beach levels along the frontage would be expected to lower in locations prone to erosion, potentially speeding up the failure of defences and leading to accelerated cliff recession in undefended areas. Once defences fail and beaches get lower, the frequency and severity of coastal flooding would be expected to increase, as would coastal erosion. Next slide, please.
And thank you, Ben. You've talked us through to the Q&A part now. So there's two ways you can do this. Should you wish to ask a question, please do put it in the chat. And we've already got one from Carol Walden. So Carol, I'll talk through that in a minute. You can also use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen in order to raise your hand, and my colleague Nikki will keep an eye on that. So we have a question from Carol. It's a long time between now and 12 months' time when the final options and strategy are decided upon. What about interim works that may be needed in the meantime, and how can these be decided upon? Who would like to take that one?
Yeah, I can start
Thank you,
off with
Alan.
that one. So yeah, whilst this strategy is being developed, we do both New Forest and BCP and the Environment Agency as well. We regularly go and inspect the defences that we have along the coast, and we have the ongoing monitoring data as well that we analyse to make day-to-day operational decisions whilst this longer term is being planned. So we do keep an eye on it. We do respond. An example from BCP is we had an issue with a bit of the wall in part of the harbour earlier, I think it was earlier this year, that was starting to cause concern, and we went in there and did some maintenance works to shore it up and buy us some more time whilst we set this longer term picture in train. And that would be the same elsewhere as well with New Forest.
Great, thank you, Alan, for that. Mike Andrews, you have a question. Mike, would you like to unmute and ask? Right, Mike, we can hear you now if you'd like to ask your question. Mike, can you hear me?
It's
There we
Emlyn
go.
Costa. Hello.
Hello, do you want to ask your question, Mike?
Yes, actually, it's Emlyn Costa, a colleague of Mike.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Go ahead.
That's fine. Thank you. Thanks, Mike, for allowing me access. I am, just briefly, I'm a geologist calling in from the United States. I studied the Barton situation while at school in Christchurch and New Milton in the late 60s, and I was back in the area just 2 weeks ago. And I'm delighted that this session is going on. My comment and question are this. The comment is that I applaud totally what's going on in terms of synthesizing the problem and the planning efforts going forward. But I'd like to constructively comment that I think what's missing as a matter of public education and a matter of planning baseline necessity is that there is no listing of the efforts to date and the cost of the efforts to date to attempt stabilization of either beaches and or cliffs and or of flooding. And so I think that's a necessary precursor to moving forward, is for the public to understand what kind of scale of dollars. So already in 1970, close to £1 million had been spent on the efforts of Barton-on-Sea, which continue. I have no idea about the subsequent 4 or 5 decades of expenditure, but they are very significant. And the second thing is that I think the future may well bring in a loss of life. While that may not have occurred to date, there could be conceived catastrophic flooding events or subsidence events which will put life as well as property at risk. So again, that's a rationale for wanting to make sure that the readers and the stakeholders to these analyses are duly informed about the cost of efforts to date. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Would anyone like to comment back on that? It was a very complex and detailed question. Thank you.
Yeah,
Alan.
Just to say on that, so I'll let Pete jump in as well in a moment, because I know he's looking at Barton as well. But just on the long-term risks, we do identify in the shoreline management plans, and the evidence will be reviewed as part of this, identify where it just won't be feasible to continue to defend, and we will have to adapt and relocate. The chairman of the Environment Agency last week was in the press saying very much that we will have to recognise as a country that we will not be able to defend everywhere, and there will have to be action to address that as a result. It's a national discussion that's needed to be had here. And in many places around the world where we are going to have to accept some communities will need to move. Where and when that is and how that happens is still a matter of debate. But yeah, no, I take your point.
Great, thank you. Pete, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid question. For Barton-on-Sea, the SMP policy was recently, well, in the last review was changed from hold the line to manage realignment. So there's already a sort of an appreciation that hold the line in areas such as an eroding cliff like Barton-on-Sea, with all the designations that go along with it, is probably not, it's not sustainable into the future. So an adaptive policy has been sort of adopted there so that erosion is likely to continue, and we're looking into ways of managing that erosion, particularly through the groundwater issue that exists there. So by managing the groundwater, you are able to potentially manage the erosion, but with the acceptance that erosion will still continue there, and that is actually part of the ongoing evolution of the bay. So so it's certainly recognised in that sense. In terms of costs, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a lot of investment in the late 60s and also in the early 80s, but actually a lot of that work that was done is coming towards the end of its life. So other than maintenance, a lot of that's the systems, the drainage system and the rock that was put in there hasn't been, we haven't had any sort of large schemes undertaken since that point in time, really. So we're relying on maintenance, but a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the investment hasn't been continued. So we would, the strategy is really looking at that, what the current situation and potentially what it should be taken forward with respect to the particular environment in that location.
May I just add, Sarah, a couple of points?
Of course you can.
Thank you. So I've donated to the Red House Museum my reports, photographs and clippings, which I generated during the late 60s. And having just been back, as I mentioned before, and having walked the cliff top at Naish Farm, where I was surprised and frankly impressed to see, as I understand it, they've already taken away all the structures from a cliff top buffer zone, at least of 100, 150 feet wide. So they've already prepared for imminent cliff failure and the loss of property at Naish Farm. And so, but I'd also say that at Barton, efforts to put in groins go back to the 1930s, even though the main phase of work and the almost $750,000 of expenditure started in the late 60s. So I'm going to emphasize again that you can't really, I think, go forward without taking stock of going backward. And if the future holds for managed retreat, which is the most draconian of protective measures in order to get people and property out of the way of the next phase of predictable loss of land, then you can't do that without having a baseline for public understanding and support for the amount of money and effort that's been spent and wasted to date. Right now at Barton-on-Sea and at Highcliffe, it's easy to see the past measures of putting in sheet piling, which was supposed to be vertical and which now is exposed at 45-degree angles, and all the exposed pipes that were supposed to drain the back of the sheet piling, they've all been exposed, and you've now got groins at the beach at Highcliffe, which are completely exposed, and they have no purpose or value whatsoever. So again, I'm really going to emphasize that I think the reports respectfully are missing a calibration of the efforts and the successes and failures, mostly failures to date, of trying to manage nature.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I know that's promoted some interest within the chat, so thank you for that. Have we got any other questions before we move on to Ben's next section? There's nothing in the chat. Anyone got their hands up? I can't see anyone. Can you, Nikki? So we shall move on if that's okay. So Ben, we shall have the next slide. Thank you, Alan. So Ben's going to talk through coastal processes and sediment transport. Thank you, Ben. Okay,
thank you. So another part of the baseline studies has involved examining the coastal processes in the area, which has been supported by undertaking some recent numerical modelling. The main focus of the coastal processes work was to understand the hydrodynamics of the area, so the tides, the waves, and also the sediment dynamics within the bay, and subsequently the flood and erosion risk along the frontage. The potential impact of climate change and increased storminess and sea level rise was also considered in these assessments. The coastal processes work summarises the vast amount of research that's actually already been undertaken on these topics in the bay. For example, the sediment transport in the bay has been widely studied previously and is summarised well by the figure shown in the bottom left. So this is from SCOPAC, and it shows the dominant longshore sediment movement direction is from the west to the east within the bay. You can also see the green arrows coming down from the mainland, which show the important sediment inputs from the eroding cliffs. On On the right-hand side of the bottom right-hand side of the slide, you can see some results of the recent work looking into how the impact of sea level rise could impact the intertidal habitats within Christchurch Harbour. The top image shows the existing intertidal habitat extent, but within the next 100 years, as sea levels rise and intertidal areas are squeezed, the vast majority of the salt marsh is projected to be lost. Next slide, please. So as part of the coastal processes work, we've also undertaken some numerical modelling to assess the risk of breaching through Mudderford Sandbank under the do nothing scenario. So it's important to remember that the results of this model are based on no further maintenance and being undertaken and any beach recycling in this area being stopped. The assessment indicates that the most likely breach location is in the central part of the sandbank, as shown by the second image down. And it indicates that the likely timing would be in 25 to 30 years' time if a breach were to occur. This was based on modelling the sediment transport of the sandbank over time and assessing estimated rates of erosion. Once we had estimated that a breach could occur in the future, we wanted to determine how this may impact the hydrodynamics within the harbour and then the potential impacts on flood risk. And to do this, we simulated two breach scenarios, a 25-metre wide breach and a much wider 90-metre wide breach. The results of the model indicate that generally the impact on waves and water levels within the harbour due to a breach is actually very minimal. Water levels would not be impacted during large magnitude flood events, but there would be some local changes to wave heights and energy around the breach location. However, as these waves disperse away from the breach site into the harbour itself, by the time they reach the north side of the harbour, we're only estimating to see waves increase in about 0.1 to 0.15 metres. And we wouldn't expect this to significantly impact flood risk within the harbour itself. Next slide, please. So we've established the number of properties within the study area that are expected to be at risk from coastal flooding now and over the next 100 years. As can be seen, this is for the numbers shown on the slide are for quite an extreme return period event, so a 1 in 200 year event. And as can be seen for the present day, we expect to see just over 150 properties expected to be at risk of flooding. But over time, primarily due to sea level rise, the number of properties expected to be at risk increases substantially. And in 100 years' time, we estimate to see over 2,000 properties at risk from the same probability event. I should stress again that these are numbers for a do nothing scenario where nothing is done to reduce the coastal flood risk now or in the future. Next slide, please. We've also looked at the coastal erosion risk, and we've used information from the preceding shoreline management plan for the area and more recent data sets from the Environment Agency to assess the number of properties at risk along the strategy frontage. The erosion zones along the western part of the bay are presented there on the right-hand side, the figure on the right-hand side. And as can be seen, there's a large area of land expected to erode should nothing be done to reduce the risk. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this map just shows the erosion zones further to the east in the central part of the bay. The main area of interest here is Chewton Bunny, where we see that transition from the defended area in the west to an undefended area in the east. And then the next slide shows the projected erosion for the area in the east part of the strategy frontage at Milford, which is back to a fairly linear rate of erosion over time. Within the strategy area as a whole, over the next 100 years, we're expecting to see over 1,300 properties being at risk for erosion. But the vast majority of these properties are expected to be at risk from 2070 onwards, with actually very few at risk today. Next slide, please. So the properties at risk of flooding and erosion have been used to calculate the economic damages if nothing is done to reduce the risk. incorporated a range of other damages, such as damages to vehicles, traffic disruption, road damages, education disruption, loss of life, and mental health impacts as well. And in summary, over the next 100 years, the total damages due to flooding and erosion are estimated to exceed £1.2 billion, discounted to account for the impact of many of these damages occurring quite some time in the future. The present value sum is just over £175 million. The damage assessment will be used when developing options for managing the flood and erosion risk for the strategy, as by reducing the risk, the damages would be avoided, thus creating an economic benefit and helping us build a case for further investment. In addition to the values shown on this slide, we've also undertaken an assessment of the impacts on businesses in the study area, the visitor economy, recreation, and the health and wellbeing impact. And they are all summarised in the detailed baseline economic damages report. I think that's the last slide, so that's it from me. But again,
Brilliant.
An opportunity to ask questions.
Thank you, Ben. So yes, if you would like to ask a question, please use the functionality. The lovely American gentleman whose name I've forgotten, but isn't called Mike Andrews, has put his hand up again. I'll just quickly, before I come to you, say colleague Matt Hosey has popped into the chat. Successes and failures of historic methods of coast protection will be taken into account for the next stages of options appraisal in order for us to shortlist the preferred methods of managing the coastline into the future. Thank you, Matt, for that. And my colleague Nikki has also put a link to a flood map into the chat function. Should you like to access that or link to it, please do put any questions you've got into the chat. And we shall go to our American friend. I feel awful, I've forgotten your name already. You need to change it. I won't call you Mike, but you know who I mean.
Yes, thank you. It's Emlyn Costa.
Emlyn, fantastic name.
Good Welsh name. I'm British, by the way.
It is.
Yeah,
thank you. Right, go ahead, Emlyn, with your question.
All right. Well, so that last presentation very much responded to my earlier missing data point out, which was that, there needs to be a calibration, a recording of the damages. But I would suggest, and maybe it exists, I don't know, but I think it would be very instructive to have a graphic of the coast showing the where and the how much and the when of these attempted remedial efforts at stabilizing beaches and stabilizing cliffs, rather than just sort of a listing in a narrative report. I think that would be much more instructive. What I wanted to add is that, and I don't think mentioned, but again, I'm sorry if I'm not seeing it all, is that the particular geological situation at Barton, where you have an upper cliff comprising sandy layers through which groundwater drains quite readily, interacting with an impervious mid-cliff layer of clay. All of these strata, by the way, are 30 or so million years old, dating back to the Eocene epoch, when the climate was completely different than it is now, alligators and subtropical plains. But the problem of Barton, which is not, I think, explained, is that despite all efforts to control beaches and attempt to stabilize the cliff, you have the eternal and relentless forces of an upper part of the cliff that wants to subside over that water level that's held up by the lower clay layer. And that, I think, is something which any amount of engineering cannot overcome, the force of nature.
Thank you, Emlyn. Would anyone like to quickly respond to that before I go to the next question?
It's
Matt's
probably
got his hand up.
So I was just going to come in. So
okay,
it's probably worth mentioning. I was going to mention it in a moment as well, but the detailed reports behind what we have shown is a very short summary of key points tonight is all on our website. So all the evidence behind this is available in our draft reports online. So there's a lot more detail on the description of the nature of the cliffs and the history of defences within those. Yeah, welcome. And if anyone wants to read through those and advise if they think there's additional detail, etc., to input to those, we'll happily take that information on board. And I take the point about the summarising visually the past defences, etc. That's something we can think about creating for future sort of engagement rounds as well. So I like the idea of it. So we'll have a think about what we can do on that.
Great. Emmeline, you've had an effect. Thank you very much, Alan. Matt, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to make the point. First of all, agree with what Emmeline says. Managing the cliff zone is very difficult. It comes with a lot of challenges. I think the mapping that Ben showed a minute ago with the erosion risk in the areas shows the Nash section forecast to recede far more quickly than Highcliffe and Button that are at the flanks of Nash, which I guess shows the successes of what coast protection has done, because it's slowed the rate of erosion. So, can we stop it altogether? That's difficult to do, but what we can do is try and manage that as best we can. And I think, I know you mentioned the Highcliffe groins earlier, but actually that cliff line is pretty stable. So the groins have actually performed a good job compared to Nash. I did cliff studies on that back when I graduated, and it was around about 2 to 2.4 meters. It was receding per annum. So yeah, so I think what we do is within our proposals is be honest with ourselves as to what we can manage in the sense of slowing erosion and how we manage that into the future, what it means in the sense of the impact on the residents that are at risk over that period of time, and what sort of time we've got before perhaps other management methods need to be adopted. So yeah, it was a good point, and we are completely aware of that.
Great, thank you, Matt. Keith has popped into the chat, but I'm pleased to see Catherine's already on it. Keith had asked, my friend has a house near the sea at Poole. Is there a similar info action for that area? And Catherine has put a link to the Poole Bay strategy. Thank you. And an article on it as well. Thank you very much. Have we got any other questions at this point before we move on? Nikki, can you see any hands up? They seem to be popping to the top. No, we're all a bit sunned out today and just wanting to listen rather than question, but you can pop them into the chat right until the end of tonight's session, and we will make sure they all get answered. So as the group got anything else that they want to add, Alan or Ben or Peter at this time?
No, nothing
No,
for me.
well, we shall move on then. Thank you very much. We'll take the next slide. I think, Alan, it is you.
Yeah, back to me again. So just a couple of slides to round out this session, just to let you know what we're currently doing at this round of engagement and what will be coming up later this year and into next year as well. So this round of engagement, as I mentioned, is the second of 6 throughout our programme. This webinar tonight is the third element of face-to-face events we've done. So we've done this online presentation. We had good feedback from last July when we did these events that they were popular. So we've provided it again. We've also done 2 in-person events last week. One at Christchurch Library, where we got around 70 people come along during the day to meet and discuss with us, and last Thursday at Milford, where we had around 100 people come and visit us, which was nice. It's the first time we've been able to get out and do in-person engagement for a long time, so it was nice to go and be able to have that in-person discussion with everyone. As Sarah mentioned at the start, we've got an online survey at this stage running. We live until the end of Sunday the 26th of June, so you've got time to have a look at that and feedback. The link is on the screen. I think it's been circulated as well. You will also find there, I mentioned all of the draft reports that are behind the summary information that Ben has talked through this evening. So there's a lot more detail in there if you wish to have a look for it. Would welcome your views. Are we missing anything obvious in our evidence base at this point before we finalise those and use that evidence to guide our options appraisal process? Similarly, if you read the reports and think there's a option that you think might be a good idea to consider, feel free to let us know that as well in your feedback, and we can put it on into the mix with the long listing stage of the process that we're about to embark on in the coming few months.
Great. Alan, can I just ask a question Jan's put in the chat?
Okay.
Question is, so do you have to wait for funding to start this strategy, or has it already begun? An interesting question.
For doing this strategy work, we have secured central government funding of £450,000. That's paying for all the work we're doing at the moment. Once the strategy is approved, any schemes that are identified as being needed, there is a further business case that needs to be developed, but it will be streamlined by the fact we've got a strategy approved. So we'd have to bid for that funding to do the business case and deliver the scheme, and there will be contributions needed from those who benefit from the schemes identified normally to deliver that. But for getting the strategy done and in place, we've got the funding. It's all been paid for by central government.
Okay, thank you, Alan. I think that does answer the question. I appreciate that. And goodbye to Tony. Thank you for coming. He's just said goodbye in the chat. Okay, Alan, if you want to go to your next slide, that's great.
Okay, so as well as the survey page online, between engagement events, we've also got the project information on the twobays.net website. If you go to current projects bar at the top of that page, you'll see Christchurch Bay and Harbour SM strategy at the top of the drop-down menu. Information as we're going along, we're keeping up to date on there, periodically updating information, and that will be where we also again make put notice of future engagement events. And in terms of future engagement, so we'll be doing a mixture of things. So the next round of engagement will by necessity be invited stakeholders only to 2 workshops next month to help us identify and formulate the long list of options that we will start with the options appraisal. So we're making sure we've got a spread of all different viewpoints and sector interests and representatives from across our stakeholder list. But because of the nature of the workshops we want to run for those, we need to manage the numbers. So that will be an invited piece. But again, if you're not invited to those, if you've expressed views on particular options, we are capturing that and putting that into the mix as well, so it won't be missed. Our plan later in the year, once we've gone through an appraisal of the long list and we've identified what we think the short list is, we'll come out and do another round of engagement similar to this, with some face-to-face events to let people know where we're at and what we think the long list to short list appraisal is showing us. Following that, we will be going into the detailed assessment of the shortlist, and next June time we are expecting to come out with the leading preferred options along the coast, and that will be the formal 3-month statutory consultation period as well. So all the other assessments will be available then as well. So you'll see all the evidence as we go along and have opportunity to input to our thinking as we go along, and keeping up to date on 2bays.net and our 2 websites.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alan. And we've done extremely well for time. We have one more poll to do, but because we have gone through so well, I will open up for Q&As directly after this poll. We have some time left. So your question is, how did you find the level of information presented today? Was it too much or too technical, about right for you, or not enough? I'm sure everyone at the moment is delighted that it's just about right. Keep popping it in the poll and we shall take that data. Thank you very much. Okay, we're nearly everybody done. Thank you. So if you want to ask a question at this point, please feel free to pop your hand up, pop it into the chat, or alternatively, because we have done well for time, if you prefer to unmute and ask your question, that is fine. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Nikki. So does anyone have a question? Emmeline's just popped in something into the chat. Thank you, Emmeline. Suggesting cliff stabilisation be added to the title of the study reports because beach erosion and flooding doesn't cover it. And thank you very much as well, Emmeline, for your email there. That will be noted. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Keith is asking, where will the record of this be? Can we confirm how it will be shared or kept?
in terms of this meeting?
Yep.
What were we doing with the recording? We posted it last time, I think. So.
Okay, so Keith, we will make sure that everybody knows where to locate it. Okay, so it can be shared at your leisure. Matt, you have your hand up. Would you like to add?
Yeah, just really to clarify Emily's sort of question there. I mean, flood and coastal erosion risk management just encompasses what we do as an industry sector. So certainly when we look at option appraisals, you know, where we've got the cliff lines, then cliff stabilisation is one of the ways we could look at managing the erosion in our area. I mean, there's other ways of managing erosion with hard defences, etc. But you know, we'll certainly be very clear on where we're proposing any cliff stabilisation measures. So yeah, just to explain really that EFSA, flood and coastal erosion risk management, is the industry sector sort of label for what we manage really as succinctly as we possibly can.
Okay, brilliant. And thank you for that. Catherine, you have your hand up. You're going to answer the question about where the recording is going to be.
Yes, that's right. So we have the Flood and Coastal website, which is 2bays.net, which is the website which is on the screen there, on the page that Alan showed a minute ago, where you go to current projects and then come down to Christchurch Bay and Harbour Strategy. The links will all be there so that you can get to the information. The Have Your Say website is part of the larger BCP Council consultation area, so it's a little bit more tricky to give you a succinct web address, but you can access it through 2bays.net. And when the recording is ready, we'll pop that onto the Have Your Say website so that you can look at this presentation again or access the information boards that we had at the exhibition, at the public events, and also the technical reports are there to help you complete the online survey.
Great, Catherine, that was very, very succinct and helpful. Thank you. We do have a question from Kay. Kay asks, are Hordle cliffs as unstable as those at Barton? Would anyone like to take that question from the team?
It's probably one for Pete. So,
go on, Pete.
Pete, sorry, Pete.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, so I was just trying to find mute there. It's different at Hordle. In particular, the Barton is driven, as I said earlier, a little bit about the groundwater. You've got slip surfaces, preferred bedding slip surfaces, which is so basically the sea attacks the toe, unloads the cliff, and causes this sort of conveyor belt of failure through the cliff. But the geology changes. Barton is typified by the clay and sand, and there's differences in permeability between the layers. As you move further eastwards, the cliff becomes, well, predominantly more sandier further along. So although there is clay there as well, it changes. So they actually act differently. So they, in terms of erosion, they degrade in a different way. So it's all down to the groundwater, to the geology, in terms of how the cliffs actually sort of behave and how they erode.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. Dave, our good friend Dave from the Environment Agency, has just noted it's worth mentioning that there is a difference between coastal erosion and land instability, and we have a mix of these across the strategy frontage. I don't know, Dave, if you want to take the opportunity to expand on that while we have a little bit of time left before we finish. You can unmute.
I can, yeah.
There you go. Thank you, Dave.
Evening, everyone. Yeah, just worth, I think, making the point that there is a difference between coastal erosion, so erosion of the coast from wind and waves and rising seas, and loss of land or erosion of the cliff top from land instability, and there is a distinct difference, and what you do at the toe of the cliff to prevent erosion from the sea doesn't necessarily solve the problem if you've got land instability issues, and we see that at places like Nash and Barton and a number of other areas. So there's that distinct difference, and one is land instability is not necessarily grant fundable, which can make a big difference here. So that's something that we'll need to pick up and consider within this strategy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Peter, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so as Dave said, I mean, how the toe is defended is a key point. Sections along Hordle have a sea wall, which has been quite effective over time to prevent that toe from eroding, but that doesn't prevent changes happening offshore. In particular, large extreme events such as the Valentine storm, which have potential to change the offshore profile. What then happens is when you do, as was highlighted in the presentation, beach levels have been reducing over time. When you get to a sufficient point where the beach is reduced sufficiently, it cannot protect the seawall. The seawall then is likely to fail, which it has done at Westover, and then we got a very, very rapid rate of erosion. It's actually termed coastal catch-up. So the cliff can go back quite fast, can accelerate back to a preferred position. So so that's another sort of factor that has led to some of the erosion at Hordle. So it's quite a complicated process, and it's a mixture really of the geology, as I said earlier, but also any intervention that's been done earlier that can also affect how stable it is and how much it might accelerate if defences are not maintained.
Good point, Peter, thank you. And just a reminder that nature is never anything other than quite complex. We have a question in the chat from Tracy. We might make this the last one before we finish off just with Alan's last slide. But Tracy says, nobody would want to see the walk from Milford to Barton across the cliff top blocked, but is this something being considered to avoid footfall increasing erosion? That is an interesting question. Would anyone like to take that?
I mean, I can just give us some background on that access path. It's part of the European long distance footpath. It was a public right of way, but now that's actually been lost through the erosion. It now remains as a permissive path across private land. I'm not sure exactly whether footfall increases erosion on the path as such, but it is an undefended section of coastline, and it will be subject, at the moment it is subject to ongoing erosion. There are arrangements with the landowner to move the fence back to allow it to naturally erode, but also for the path to remain intact. It's also going to be part of the national coast path, which is the English coast path, which is Natural England is going to be managing that, and that will come into they will end up managing that once that path is finally agreed.
It's probably worth noting that typically the guidance from those who manage those kind of national trails paths is they accept erosion and will divert. So it's not a driver for us to intervening to protect the path where it lies as well. So that's always worth bearing in mind. That quite often gets asked of us when we're doing these kind of projects, that you must intervene to protect the coast path where it is. But actually, those who manage the coast path will tell us that's not the case, and we can't justify schemes on that basis.
Okay.
And also, just to add that when it becomes hazardous for people to walk along there's have to be closures in order to then adjust the fence line, because there's arable farms there and tenants there that obviously manage that, and with fencing and livestock, so that has to be moved and has to be closed periodically. That's the reason behind that. But I think all efforts are being made to keep it open for as long as it can, but through this sort of rollback of the fencing.
Okay, Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Alan, as well for that. So I think a lot of the questions brought up some really good answers, maybe some unexpected ones. So thank you for that. It's always great to have as many people as we can participate. Just a reminder, there is a contact email. You can see it on your screen for any project inquiries. And as discussed before, please do go to the website. There is far more information that has been able to be covered tonight. We will definitely make sure that the recording is made available to you, and any questions that haven't been answered are done so if you pop them into the chat before we go. But thank you all very much. Thank you to the team for tonight for giving up their time to talk through that. It's been extremely useful and invaluable, and appreciate colleagues from other agencies coming along as well. And of course, thank you to all of you taking up your time on a sunny evening when maybe we should have all been in the garden having a gin and tonic. But we love our coast in Dorset, and we want to make sure that we protect it and love it as best we can. So thank you all very much, and I will say goodbye to you and let my colleague close us down. Please do go away.